The next part of visual design we're going to talk about is proportion and scale. So if you look at these two sailboats, they have essentially the same shape. Especially when I simplify them, they really have a very similar design language. But if you notice, based on the size of the people, the boat on the far right is actually much bigger than the boat on the far left. So what this is a different scale. One in real terms is just much bigger than the other, but they have the same proportion. And when it comes to design, proportion is actually going to be way more important than scale. And proportion always asks the question, how large is one part relative to another part? So in this sailboat, it would be, how large is one sail relative to the other sail? Or how large are the sails relative to the hull? We are culturally conditioned, or maybe biologically conditioned, to see proportions and understand a certain meaning. So when you see this owl, it looks cute. But what is it that makes it look cute? First off, if you divide it into proportions, you can tell that its head is pretty big compared to the rest of its body. It is about 3 heads tall. Also, relative to the size of its head, it has really big eyes. So this would be a way of analyzing it through proportions. So what can we think of that has a big head and big eyes? Human babies. We love babies. In fact, probably biologically, we want to protect babies. We want to nurture them. So we are sort of inherently attracted to them. So as a designer, you would use this to your advantage. And in my opinion, no one uses this better than Pokemon. Pokemon character designs are great. But more than just great, specifically they are very cute. They've taken normal animals, using them as a reference, and then imbued them with extra cuteness. The whole point of the game is wanting to collect these monsters. And it's a lot more fun to collect something that you just want to spend time with. There's just a certain gravity about these character designs, and a lot of it has to do with the proportional relationships. Each of these characters has emphasized the head. They've emphasized the eyes relative to the other features. And because these games are designed to be played on a very small screen, it's important that they only show what's necessary. And all they're left with are the core essentials of cuteness. So when you look at this crocodile, there's no way of knowing how big it is. He is drawn on just a blank sheet of paper, so the sense of scale is impossible to know. Well, I made him intentionally tough looking, and I did that through proportion. I wanted to emphasize certain forms by reducing the other forms. So for instance, I made his head smaller relative to the body than it normally would be. This was not an accident. In making his head smaller, it artificially makes his shoulders and body look bigger. He's got a big barrel chest now. I also shrunk the legs a little bit. So each of these decisions I made strayed from reality. I decided, yes, I know what a real crocodile looks like, but for the sense of my story, it's going to be more important to emphasize his toughness. So if I can make him look more like a football player, but still be a crocodile, I've got a good design. The design is very clear and obvious. And then when I make this cartoon version, I've even made it more simplified. I've left out most of the details, enhanced those proportional relationships, and made him look really tough. Tough in an obvious way. This is the beauty of cartooning. And if you want to see a great example of this principle, look at caricature. A good caricature artist is not painting realistically. And yet, you can look at their caricature and immediately know who it is. Because what they're doing is they're taking the recognizable features of a real person and emphasizing them. They're totally changing around the proportional relationship in an attempt to play up on those key features. And in doing so, they diminish the other features. So if you've never practiced doing a caricature, this is a great way to experiment with emphasis and proportion. So how about this lineup? These robots all look pretty different from one another. Some are squat and tough, and others are tall and skinny. But actually, these are all different versions of my communications droid. All I've done here is change the proportional relationships. I took the finished droid, and just to prove a point, I cut him up into sort of a paper doll. I separated each of the limbs, and then I rearrange them in different proportional relationships. But the effect is amazing. Some of these just look like they're heavier. They look like they would be more for fighting or for hard work, while others look tall and spindly, like they might be fast runners or potentially information gatherers. But ultimately, all of the details are exactly the same. The materials and colors, nothing has changed. It's only a different proportional relationship. In short, these choices matter. Nothing should be arbitrary. Each choice should be carefully considered. So when you're looking at your thumbnails, your shape silhouettes, think about proportion. Because hopefully the reference you've gathered tells you a good deal about proportion. There should be some general similarities between all of the animals and robots that I've gathered on this sheet. Like I said before, generally speaking, they all have relatively large eyes. They also often have large head relative to the rest of the body size. Well, I considered these proportional relationships when I was making my silhouettes. And the silhouettes that I was happiest with were the ones that really played up on these proportional relationships. So here's the big secret. When I gathered reference, I wasn't gathering it to be a direct copy. A picture of a barn owl is not that useful for making a robot unless you can think about the barn owl's proportions. Those hidden connections inside the barn owl are going to transfer directly to a robot, even if a beak and feathers have nothing to do with it. So when you gather reference, don't necessarily think about the actual objects. I don't really care that there's an owl and a frog on here. Instead, I'm looking for their visual characteristics. Do they have the proportions that say what I want? Do they have shapes that have the right icons? Because it's really the essence of the reference that you want, not the exact particulars themselves. So you've seen me prove that proportions matter. Well, I want you to find out for yourself. So the homework for this video is going to be called Droid Mix and Match. So I've included this paper doll of the droid, and all of his pieces are on individual layers. So I want you to try making wildly different layouts and different droids, all from these same base parts. So feel free to warp and transform them all you want, and then build them back together into a finished robot. I think you'll be amazed at how much variety you can get by simply changing those interproportional relationships.